Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, glad you're with us on the Three Martini Lunch. We don't have any good martinis today, and if you saw the debate last night, you know why. You might hear a little bit of crosstalk in our intro music there. That's pretty much how it was all night long for a lot of different questions on the debate stage in Cleveland. Trump, Biden, Chris Wallace. In case you didn't get enough of it, though, here's a couple of examples of what we're talking about.
Well,
I got rid of the individual mandate.
I'm going to give you an opportunity.
I got rid of the individual mandate, which was a big chunk of Obama. That is absolutely a big thing. That was the worst part of Obamacare.
Sir,
Chris, that was the worst part of Obama.
Let me ask my question.
Well, I'll ask Joe. The individual mandate was the most unpopular aspect of Obamacare. I got rid of it.
I'd like you
we will protect people with
President, I'm the moderator of this debate, and I would like you to let me ask my question, and then you can answer your question.
Go ahead.
And in case you can handle one more.
I have to answer his statement.
No, you have repeatedly. You've been talking back
and forth.
You made a
statement.
I'm asking you.
I would love to end it.
Sir,
I would love to end it.
If you want to switch seats.
We could very quickly.
We can do that, but
I'd send in the National Guard. It would be over. There'd be no problem.
Okay.
But they don't want to accept the National Guard.
So there's lots of different stuff we could say here, Jim. Let's start with the fact that the president was interrupting. You made a good point on Twitter last night that this is kind of taking a page out of the Biden playbook. This is exactly what Joe Biden did to some extent with Paul Ryan in the vice presidential debate back in 2012 that had us so annoyed. I think he probably overdid it to the point where it definitely annoyed some people, even those who might be generally disposed to liking him. But for a lot of different points in the night, Biden engaged in it somewhat too. And we'll get to Chris Wallace in a minute. It definitely made things chaotic to the point where I'm not sure anybody's mind got changed. We already knew from polls going in that most people were just watching to see how their candidate did. And I'm not sure anybody left feeling all that great last night.
Yeah, I guess, we should probably begin with an apology to our listeners of having to just put up with even two sound bites of that incoherent gobbledygook. I don't quite understand. And there's a lot to critique about all of the participants last night. But if you are President Trump and you believe that Joe Biden is senile or close to senile, if you feel like he can't control what comes out of his mouth, if you feel like he has to defend a lot of extreme positions of other people in his party that he's secretly being controlled by, or I think more likely that he will attempt to placate if he's elected president, if you feel like Biden can't handle the pressure, if you feel like often his answers turn into incoherent word salad, why do you interrupt him constantly? Right. Why not let him hang himself with his own words? I was thinking about how much 4 years ago. First of all, this was a very different Donald Trump than the Donald Trump we saw debating Hillary Clinton. It's interesting. A lot of people thought Hillary Clinton won the debates. I obviously shouldn't win the election, so I don't know if it's necessarily that huge win that everybody thought it was. But you look back and you realize Trump had more good moments then. You'd be in jail and stuff. And when he let Hillary speak a lot more than he did against Biden. And because of that, Hillary Clinton said things like the Heller decision at the Supreme Court was about keeping guns out of the hands of toddlers, right? Hillary would say absolute nonsense that would get people at home sitting up and saying, come on, that's not true. And Trump never let Biden do that. And I think, it was a win by the measuring stick that Trump had the more dominant personality. I think that's very clear. It was a win in the sense that I think Biden never really got a chance to articulate his case against Trump or even really finish a thought. But I don't think if you're running behind, as the polls seem to suggest Trump is, this is what you need to do. I think if you're a Biden supporter, I don't think you saw much last night that made you say, this is not the right guy. If you're a Trump supporter, you probably loved it. Although I think there are probably some folks who don't think Trump love it. I noticed Scott Adams, one of the president's most steadfast supporters, said that it was a tie. If Scott Adams said it was a tie, you didn't have a great evening. I went through today's Morning Jolt, went through a whole bunch of folks who are not fans of Joe Biden. Guy Benson, Michael Goodwin over at the New York Post. Chris Christie said that afterwards, Trump's problems can be worked out. When Christie, the guy preparing you for the debate, is acknowledging things didn't go great, I think you didn't have a good night. And I think what's frustrating is there was a great opportunity there. There are a lot of times where I think a lot of conservatives and even a lot of Trump supporters sitting at home were yelling at their television, saying, "Wait, Biden just refused to answer how he was going to whether he was going to pack the court, expand the size of it." Biden's line on Antifa is a philosophy, not a militia or something like that. There were opportunities there. And that Trump really didn't take them because he was just in this constant heckling, that basically felt like his Twitter feed come to life. And maybe the fans loved it. Maybe the people who already liked him loved it. I don't think this dislodged any Biden supporters. And I think this is not – I think the best case scenario, if Trump didn't just, botch the entire thing – is a sense this was a giant missed opportunity. And when you're running behind, you need to make the most of your opportunities.
And we'll get to each of those that you mentioned, the court packing question as well as the Antifa versus white supremacist question coming up. But let's talk about Chris Wallace for just a second. I need to apologize because I said he'd do the best job moderating. I thought he was the worst part of last night, not just because he couldn't keep control, and that's not necessarily his fault. If you can't actually get people to stop talking, if they won't stop talking, there's not a ton you can do about it. But I also thought he just injected himself too much anyway. One of the crosstalk you heard there was Wallace trying to ask a question about health care, and Trump jumped the gun because he was attacking the premise of the question. And it was about whether or not the Republicans actually have a health care reform plan, something that's frustrated us over time. And we certainly saw in 2017 there was at least no consensus on the Republican side about that. But Trump started talking about getting rid of the individual mandate, bringing down drug prices. And Chris Wallace interjects with, well, that's not a comprehensive plan, which may be true. But that is not the job of the debate moderator. This is not Fox News Sunday. This is not a one-on-one interview. It's not your job to debate the candidate on the points, on the merits. Once you've asked the question, it's up to the other candidate to check him on either dodging the question or being wrong about the facts or just having a bad track record on it. It's not up to the moderator to do that. I don't know if Wallace got so frustrated with Trump's interrupting at times that he felt like he just had to do that for some reason. But I think Wallace outstepped his role many different times last night. And I'm sure he was exasperated due to all the crosstalk, but I think he injected himself way too much into the conversation.
Greg, I think that's a very fair criticism. I also think that's not really – I was struck by the number of people, generally on the right, who decided that was the storyline. That was the big deal. That was the headline coming out of the night, was how unfair Chris Wallace had been. I don't think that was the headline. I don't think that was the big takeaway. I kind of wish you could just kind of, step into an alternate universe and see that if Trump had not taken the approach he did and been more like he had in the 2016 debates, whether Wallace would have been as hostile. I think you could probably say, looking at this, Wallace probably feels more, I don't want to say ideological sympathy, but, I think it's safe to say that Wallace has a certain amount of contempt for President Trump. He does, but I think we've seen him ask tough questions of everybody. And he did approach this as an interview, and that he was combative at times, and that wasn't really what the debate moderator is supposed to be. That having been said, when one of the candidates comes out and just blows up all the rules and decides that he's going to speak for his 2 minutes and he's going to speak for a good chunk of Joe Biden's 2 minutes, that I think we saw Wallace unleashed. I think that Wallace was reacting to what was going on in front of him. I don't have an enormous amount of animosity for the way Wallace treated this. I don't look. This got completely out of control. I don't think there was anything he could have done if he did not have the authority to cut off the microphones of the people who were speaking out of turn.
I think yes, and I think that your first point, I think, is the biggest takeaway. Letting Joe Biden just ramble and gaffe himself for an hour and a half, or at least half of that time, would have been a far better approach, because in a span of 2 minutes that he's going to tangle himself in knots on at least half the questions, if not more, contradict himself in the same answer or contradict a recently held position that he had. And Trump actually had a few decent one-liners in there that got completely lost because there was so much crosstalk. And so might be a little bit different in the town hall debate or beyond. But that brings up the next question before we go on to two of the other clips. The immediate liberal media reaction last night was, well, there should be no more debates. So I don't know that they wanted that as the premise for trying to urge Biden to miss the last two opportunities to stumble here or what. But there seemed to be absolute lockstep, at least on the CNN and MSNBC panels last night.
Yeah, and I as of this morning, Biden's campaign says he's going to participate in the next two debates. I don't think that will change. I think you'll hear a lot more Democrats saying we shouldn't have the debates, and it's really hard to say based on what a dumpster fire last night was that, oh no, these two next debates absolutely have to happen. I'd rather they happen than they didn't, but if it's just going to be 90 minutes of these two guys shouting over each other and creating incoherent crosstalk, I don't know, is it wasting everybody's time? Is it a worthwhile use of everybody's time? I'm very curious what the ratings are going to be, because my sneaking suspicion is that they're probably extremely high at the beginning, and I suspect every 10 minutes or every increment, people change a channel and found a ball game or found something else to watch just because it was painful. It was auditorily fingernails across a blackboard. It was just frustrating that neither guy could make a point, neither guy could go back and forth. There was really almost no discussion of policy. And the great irony is, I think, one of my colleagues read through the transcript and said that Trump actually made more points and got into more details. But you couldn't tell because he was just constantly hectoring and heckling. Blah, 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 blah. It really, I think you'll see the other advantage we have is the next debate is a vice presidential debate. Mike Pence is not going to follow the same strategy and approach. And I think it'll be more substantive. It'll be more detailed. I think it'll be more worthwhile. And hopefully that will, but if the next two debates are going to be like this, maybe we don't have a third one. I don't know.
Let's talk about one of the other moments that we mentioned, and that's towards the end of the debate when they got into violence in Portland and other places, Antifa-related. Also, some militia groups have shown up. I believe the Proud Boys were specifically mentioned last night. But anyway, here is the preface from Wallace and then Trump and Biden talking about this issue.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
to
specifically
do it?
Well,
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
FBI director
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got to be
not
kidding.
militia. That's what his FBI director
Gentlemen?
said.
So Biden's completely out to lunch there. No surprise. Obviously, a lot of folks lashing back at Trump, saying he didn't say stand down to those extremist groups. He said stand back and stand by. So some people think that's code. Tim Scott says he just misspoke. It was an awkward time to misspeak. Jim, the fact that Joe Biden couldn't say that he urged Ted Wheeler and others to put an end to the violence because he's not in office was a particularly weak moment there in that part of the discussion as well. So what do you make about how these two guys handled it?
Yeah, a really frustrating exchange upon just one level after another. The first is, you see a lot of accusations the president is racist, the president is anti-Semitic. Let's get this out of the way. Obviously, a man who lets his daughter marries a Jewish man is probably not all that anti-Semitic. A man who moves the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem is probably not all that anti-Semitic. A man who's got lifelong friendships with the likes of Don King is probably not a white supremacist or white nationalist. But Trump does have some sort of lack of guardrails in his mind that kind of prevent him from just reacting the way most people would reacting. If at any point Trump had said, yes, of course I denounce white nationalists. Of course I denounce militias. To hell with these guys. The entire segment would have ended. There wouldn't have been anything there. Trump gets into this like weird, stubborn little game where he says he's willing to say it and then doesn't actually say it. And, I'm thinking back to his, find people on both sides. The president and his defenders insist he didn't mean the people marching in Charlottesville who were white nationalists and there was some Nazi flag and all that kind of stuff. He didn't mean those people. He meant the, very fine people who merely wanted to keep a Confederate statue. But his words came out all jumbled and left that impression that the president thought they were very fine amongst the crazed white nationalists in that crowd. Last night again, if Trump had just said, "Screw those guys, I want nothing to do with them. If you're from, if you're one of them, you're not for me. We don't share the same values." He could have done any of that, and it would have worked terrific. For some reason, he always feels this need to dance around it. People are sending me, "Oh, look, he's all these other times he said it." Well, okay, he's in front. He's got the whole country watching. It's the first debate of the re-election bid. This is about as grand an opportunity as you're going to have. He could have put it to bed, and instead he says, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." Now, I'm hearing a lot of people say, "Well, what he meant to say was stand down." Well, if you mean stand down, say stand down. Don't say stand back and stand by. He always has these weird little things. And of course, within milliseconds, he wants to shift to, "I'll tell you what, somebody's got to do something about Antifa on the left because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing problem." Within seconds, he wants to shift it back. Now, if he just said, "Screw the Proud Boys, I want nothing to do with them. They're the worst, they're the worst," then he would be able to shift and nobody would have given him any grief. And he could have turned it. And I think you can give Joe Biden real grief for saying that Antifa is an idea, not an organization. Come on, they're an organization. It's not ideas that are running around smashing windows and setting things on fire. It's people. And, but nobody's going to talk about that because, Trump out of nowhere says, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." Why is it he always gets so tongue-tied when it turns to this particular issue?
Hey guys, it's Mock and Daisy from Chicks on the Right. We're excited to tell you about our podcast, the Mock and Daisy Common Sense Cast.
From discussing topics like cancel culture, what's happening to our new generations, crises in our nation, and even some high-profile interviews, each week we touch on subjects that matter to us and matter to you.
And we're not afraid to tell you how it is. So tune in every week to hear us talk about the things or even just get a good laugh.
To find out more, go to our website, chicksontheright.com, or start listening on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
Don't forget to leave a comment, a review, and subscribe.
Well, let's talk about another issue where somebody can't give a straight answer. We've talked about it a number of times now, and that's court packing. This was fairly early on in the debate. In fact, Supreme Court was the very first issue out of the box. They talked about whether or not it was appropriate to confirm a justice right now, right before the election. Obviously, the two candidates disagreed on that. It's interesting that Biden says Amy Coney Barrett would end Obamacare, but he said he had no problem with the justice. So maybe he's telegraphing that he already knows he'll be on the court. But here's Chris Wallace asking Biden about his refusal to actually take a position publicly on court packing.
You call this a distraction by the president, but in fact, it wasn't brought up by the president. It was brought up by some of your Democratic colleagues in the Congress. So my question to you is, you have refused in the past to talk about it. Are you willing to tell the American people tonight whether or not you will support either ending the filibuster or packing the court?
Whatever position I take on that, that'll become the issue. The issue is the American people should speak. You should go out and vote. You're in voting now. Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you going to pack the
Make
court?
sure you, in fact, let people know you're a senator. I'm not going to answer the question.
Why wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
The question is,
the question Supreme
is,
Court Justice,
the
radical
question,
left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
Jim, obviously Trump jumped in there. He probably should have let Biden hang himself right there. But Joe Biden is looking worse and worse as this issue drags on.
Yeah, I just taped the editors with my colleagues Rich and Charlie. And Charlie made a very good point about the power of silence. Biden was flailing there. Biden was determined to not give an answer. And I actually think, one of the reasons you and I thought Wallace would do a good job is that Wallace is usually pretty good if he doesn't get an answer of asking the question again, right? And just letting Biden wriggle in the spotlight. Instead of letting that happen, Trump jumps in. And even if Trump could have jumped in and said, yes or no, will you expand the size of the Supreme Court? Yes or no? And just try to emphasize that, because the more a guy refuses to give you the answer, no, I will not, the more the likelihood of the answer secretly is yes. He just doesn't want to admit it. But then he jumps in with who's on your list, which is a separate issue. It's a valid issue, but Trump is just coming with all these things that nothing really penetrates. There's no any time for the viewer to kind of hear it and process it and digest it and think about, what does it mean that Joe Biden won't name his Supreme Court justices? Trump's got like 40 names on his list right now. We know who he thinks is a good kind of judge. We know what kind of judges he likes. We know what kind of values he's looking for. This should be a winning issue for Trump, and I think it probably still will be on balance. But boy, that exchange last night could have gone so much better for him.
And Biden, he just refuses to answer that question. I don't know who's telling him to say that. I'm guessing that's not something he would think on his own, because if we know anything about Joe Biden over the years, it's that he has an instinct to blab, not hide stuff necessarily, depending on what the issue is. And so he's getting some advice on that, and it's not good advice. All you have to say there is no. And he's already got a couple of Democrats on the record, including Joe Manchin, allegedly Dianne Feinstein. I think Kyrsten Sinema said no to killing the filibuster. So barring a massive landslide by Democrats in the U.S. Senate races this year, it's not even going to be an option. So it's not really going that far out on the limb, unless he's worried about alienating folks on the far left, which is also an interesting point last night, because he also said there was no manifesto, no agreement with Bernie Sanders. That's pretty easy to fact check, that he was drifting more on health care and towards the Green New Deal. He tried to separate himself on that, and I don't think it was very convincing. But again, if he had been left a twist in the wind, it would have been even more convincing.
Yeah, it's just one missed opportunity after another on this, and it's just deeply frustrating. Maybe, first of all, the vice presidential debate is a week from now, and I think Pence will probably show a little bit more message discipline. And Harris has been particularly disingenuous on this. Look, last summer, Joe Biden had basically kind of laughed it off or scoffed at the idea of expanding the court. I think I'm waiting for somebody, maybe Pence will be the guy, will say, look, most Democrats weren't really thinking about expanding the court last year because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was alive. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg died and the perceived balance on the court was likely to shift from 5-4 to 6-3, all of a sudden they oh, wait a second, we can't wait for Clarence Thomas to retire. We can't wait for Samuel Alito to retire. We can't feel confident. We'll swap out Breyer with a younger vote who will be there for 30 years. That's what's changed. Democrats believe they must always win at the Supreme Court, and if they're not winning, well, then it's not they have to change. It's the court that has to change. That's what's at stake here, and I'm waiting for somebody to lay it out that way, because I think this is a very winnable fight for the right, but I just don't. You can't do it when you're just when it's just endless crosstalk and gobbledygook.
That's an interesting thing, and I don't know if it's because I'm a Cubs fan and you're a Jets fan, and we're not used to winning a lot, although the Cubs have been a little bit better lately. No matter what seems to happen at the court, there's always somebody else that makes your expectations go up in smoke. Whether it's O'Connor drifting to the left, Kennedy drifting to the left, now Roberts drifting to the left, and if there's another conservative appointed, who knows? It could be Kavanaugh. Gorsuch has been a little bit interesting on a number of cases. So the idea that you're guaranteed to always have a conservative outcome on the court if Amy Barrett's on there and there are no other changes for a while, I think is wishful thinking, unfortunately.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, remember all the pressure around the Obamacare decision in 2012, and Harry Reid and all these Democrats really kept beating the drums, and it clearly was designed to intimidate, Justice John Roberts. The legitimacy of the court is at stake. If 5 of you have the audacity to rule the way we don't want, on what admittedly was a big issue in the upcoming presidential election, well, then the court is not legitimate anymore. Well, no, that's not that. It's perception, right? What it means is that a whole bunch of folks on the left who follow legal issues will be very, very upset about this. That's what they mean by loss of legitimacy. Hey, guess what, guys? Roe v. Wade made many people very, very upset, right? Legitimacy of the court is not dependent on whether it rules the way you want, right? The legitimacy of the court is, does it follow the Constitution, or does it feel like, okay, you can see where they're coming from on this. That is a reasonable interpretation of what the founders meant. That is a reasonable interpretation of what the Constitution allows the government to do and doesn't allow the government to do. Or does it feel like they're just making it up out of thin air and they're just pulling this stuff out of wherever because that's what they want the law to be, and they don't really care about how they get there? That's how you. So I could rant about this all day, Greg.
No, that's a good rant because it reminds me of Obama going to the Rose Garden and do the same type of intimidation. And his line was that there's never been a time when Congress has passed a law and a president has signed it that the court has overturned it. And I'm like, what? That's exactly what the point of the court is to be a check and balance on the other two branches. But like you said, whole other show, whole other rant. But that was a really weird moment in Supreme Court history. Jim, let's rest up and be back with full speed tomorrow. We'll see you then.
This day has been a long week.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch. Leave us a kind review and a 5-star rating. We're always thankful for those. Also, you can get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And please join us Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.